In the early hours of August 13th, 2025, Africa woke up to news that sent shockwaves across the continent and beyond. Namibia, Zambia, Botswana, three nations long regarded as stable democracies in southern Africa, had done the unthinkable. They announced a borderless alliance, an unprecedented move that shook the foundations of African geopolitics. This was not just another treaty. It was not another empty summit filled with speeches and promises. It was a coup against colonial borders themselves, borders that had divided communities, separated families, and locked African nations into artificial lines drawn in Berlin in 1884. News outlets rushed to cover the development. Some called it a silent revolution. Others called it reckless. But one thing was clear. Africa was witnessing a seismic shift. How could three landlocked countries decide overnight to erase their borders? What triggered this decision? And what could this mean for the future of Africa as a whole? Stay with us as we dive deep into the untold story behind the Namibia-Zambia-Botswana Borderless Alliance. To understand the magnitude of this decision, we must first journey back through history. Southern Africa is a region shaped by deep cultural ties, but also by deep colonial scars. Before colonialism, the people of modern-day Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana shared fluid borders. Tribes like the Lozi, Tswana, Ovambo, and others moved freely across rivers and plains. Families traded salt, grain, and cattle without passports or fences. Rivers like the Zambezi and Okavango were not barriers, they were bridges. But in 1884, at the infamous Berlin Conference, European powers sat around a table and carved Africa into pieces. Germany took Namibia, then called German Southwest Africa. Britain seized Zambia, then Northern Rhodesia, and Botswana, then Bechuanaland. Colonial borders were drawn with rulers on maps, splitting people apart and tethering African economies to European interests. After independence, Namibia in 1990, Zambia in 1964, and Botswana in 1966, the countries worked to develop their national identities. But the scars of division remained. Throughout the years, they collaborated through organizations like SADC, Southern African Development Community, and SACU, Southern African Customs Union. Cross-border trade improved, but borders still slowed down free movement. Truck drivers waited days at checkpoints. Villagers needed visas to visit relatives across rivers. Farmers couldn't easily sell produce across borders. Despite these barriers, the dream of unity never died. Pan-African thinkers, from Kwame Nkrumah to Thomas Sankara, had long argued that Africa's future lay not in division, but in unity. And now, more than half a century later, three nations were daring to revive that dream. So, what exactly happened on the night of August 12, 2025? Reports suggest that a closed-door meeting was held in Kasane, Botswana, near the borders where Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana converge. High-ranking officials, military leaders, and economic ministers were present. For months, they had been negotiating secretly, away from Western eyes. And that night, they reached a decision that would shock the world: to dissolve their borders and create a single, borderless zone. By dawn, coordinated announcements were made in Windhoek, Lusaka, and Gaborone. The leaders declared that citizens of Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana would now move freely without passports, trade without restrictions, and share resources as one people. But why call it a coup? Because this was more than a policy. It was a direct coup against the colonial order. It was a rejection of Western-imposed boundaries and a declaration of sovereignty on African terms. Military support reportedly ensured stability during the announcement. This was not just politics. It was history being rewritten. A move this bold carries massive implications. Free movement of people, citizens of the three nations, now have the right to travel, work, and live anywhere within the alliance without visas or permits. For many, this is liberation. Families divided by borders are reunited. Workers can chase opportunities without bureaucratic roadblocks. Students can study across countries without paying international fees. At the heart of this story lies something bigger than Namibia, Zambia, or Botswana. This is about the Pan-African dream. For decades, African thinkers like Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Julius Nyerere, and Thomas Sankara argued that Africa could never truly be free while divided by colonial borders. This alliance is perhaps the boldest step toward that dream in modern history. Imagine if more African countries joined: Kenya, Tanzania, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal. Imagine if West and East Africa erased borders. The African Continental Free Trade Area, AfCFTA, is already pushing for free trade, but Namibia, Zambia, and Botswana have just leapfrogged the bureaucracy and acted. Will ethnic tensions rise if borders disappear? Can weaker economies survive competition inside a borderless zone? Will foreign powers destabilize the alliance to protect their interests? The risks are real. But so are the hopes. A united Africa could become one of the strongest global powers in the 21st century. The Namibia-Zambia-Botswana Borderless Alliance is more than a headline. It is a statement of defiance, a rejection of colonial borders, a demand for African unity on African terms. It may succeed, it may fail, but one thing is clear: Africa is no longer content with waiting. The future is being written, not in New York or Paris, but in Windhoek, Lusaka, and Gaborone. And perhaps, just perhaps, this is the beginning of a new chapter in Africa's long struggle for freedom. Subscribe for more.